Please note, this episode is best experienced with headphones. The experiences shared in this episode are personal and subjective. They are not presented as proof, only as lived moments. Paranormal experiences affect people in different ways, and all perspectives are valid. As always, please listen with an open mind. Welcome to the Beyond Haunted UK podcast, and I thank you for listening wherever you are. My name's Jamie, and let's begin. Today's episode is a little different, because this one isn't about a legend or a case from the past. It's about something that happened to us in real time. And it happened in a place that feels like it has always existed between belief and experience. A few weekends ago, we investigated Rowtons Museum of the Paranormal and Spirituality in Carmarthen, Wales, for the very first time. And I knew, even before we arrived, that this wasn't going to feel like a normal investigation. Rowtons is housed within Penuel Chapel in Carmarthen, Wales. Penuel can trace its origins back to 1757, when a linen draper and part-time preacher named Stephen Davies founded the first chapel on the opposite side of the road. Situated in Old Chapel Yard, the congregation was formally incorporated by the Baptist Association in 1778, with Davies as their pastor. And over the following years, funds were raised to purchase land and build a new chapel, allowing the present site to be secured in 1786. The building was extended in 1797, rebuilt in 1817, and again in 1851, before undergoing substantial renovation between 1909 and 1910. Much of what you see today, including the organ and the exceptional Canadian redwood, dates from that period. This was a place of worship, prayer, and healing. A place people came to because they believed something greater than themselves could help them. Over time, the chapel became known for spiritual manifestations, for faith healing, and for reports of angels and divine beings. And it does make me wonder whether places like this still draw people in for the same reason, and whether belief leaves something behind, or whether intention imprints on a space. Because when we look back through history, we know this about ourselves. As a species, we've always looked beyond who we are. We want to believe that something exists beyond us, and that something, somewhere, is more. And in the past, people made pilgrimages, sacred journeys to places of spiritual meaning. We don't really call it that anymore, but maybe somewhere in us, we're still drawn to places that feel different, places that feel important, and even if we don't fully understand why. Our day began with a long drive from home, crossing the border into Wales and heading toward Carmarthen. The miles gave us time to talk about Penuel, about its owners, and about what this place already meant to us. It was here months earlier that we'd first met the Ghost Tube creators and one of our personal favourite YouTube investigation teams, Amy and Jared of Amy's Crypt. Even before we arrived, this journey already felt like a return. For me, the first time I visited, I knew this place would draw me back. And it wasn't just the building or the imposing structure, or even the Canadian redwood panelling and organ that make you feel like you've stepped into another time. It was something else. My first real meeting with Laura came during a guided tour of the museum, and she was clearly excited and passionate about what they had created. Alongside her was her husband Eric, quietly spoken, thoughtful, and always tinkering. Always thinking about new ways to explore and understand the paranormal. He doesn't dominate a room, instead he supports it. Together, Laura and Eric make something rare. A balance of warmth and curiosity, knowledge and humility. They are different in energy, but perfectly matched in purpose. And what stood out to me the most was Laura's knowledge, not just of the spiritual, but of the ancient, of ritual, of meaning. For a long time I had wrestled with whether the paranormal and spirituality could coexist. I'd been told many times that they couldn't, or even that they shouldn't. And yet here I was, standing in a place where they did. Openly, peacefully, and in the same space. During that first visit, something else happened. Something drew my attention upward toward the gallery, and in my mind's eye I could see him. A man. A spirit. Later, I asked Laura whether there had ever been sightings of a man in the gallery, possibly with a lamp. She told me there had been local reports of lights being seen from outside the chapel, as though someone were moving around inside. I felt validated, and I left it there, knowing he had seen me, and that I had acknowledged him. Now, we jump forward to the investigation. We arrived at 6:30 and were greeted with a hug from Laura and Eric. They helped us with our equipment and took us into the old schoolroom, and Eric was already asking questions, quiet and practical ones, about equipment, about ideas, and about what we might try. Always observing, and always thinking. We spent time there first just talking, and letting ourselves settle, allowing the nerves to drop. Then we were given a short tour to refresh us for the evening. Upstairs we entered the séance parlour. It's dark green, Victorian in feel, and you're greeted by objects and mannequins dressed in mourning attire. This is a space that holds the weight of how people once lived with death and spirituality. The old schoolroom below is large and hall-like. A classroom with small fireplaces and tall windows that still echo its chapel past. And through them, a soft glow from outside. Inside are 2 séance tables, candles, and low light. A room designed not to impress, but to invite. We chose to begin with a séance. It felt important to introduce ourselves, and to start gently. To let whatever might be there build organically. At Laura's suggestion, we set up an EMF tripwire along the floor and over a chair. And the idea was simple. If something moved toward the table, we might see it. The séance began with the sound of bells, and we sat quietly as Laura gently asked questions, waiting. And in all my years in the paranormal, I have never seen a candle behave the way it did that night. When Laura asked questions, the flame would rise as though someone were lifting it. Amazingly, the flame would also shrink and tremble as though unsure whether to stay lit. It was subtle, but it felt intelligent. Now during the séance I became fixated on one corner of the room, and there stood a mannequin in morning dress. Beside it, a glass cabinet, 3 candles on top, and artifacts inside. Now for context, I first visited Rowtons in April 2025, almost 9 months ago. I saw the artifacts then. But on my second visit in September, I spent my time in the chapel and didn't enter the séance parlour. So it would be reasonable to say I wouldn't remember what was in that cabinet. And I can honestly say I paid no attention to it upon walking into the room. Yet something in that corner began to pull me in. And we heard noises. A strange clicking sound. Now the only way I can describe it is like someone clicking a pen. Laura explained it was a noise she was not familiar with, and in my mind's eye I could see her. A woman in her 60s. Small, holding a clipboard, and she was checking it over and over, as though making sure everyone was accounted for. As though it mattered deeply. Now I stayed quiet for a while because I didn't want to disrupt the room. But it felt like she wasn't going to stop until I acknowledged her, so I spoke. I described what I could sense. And I asked whether the upstairs had ever been used as an office. Laura and Eric confirmed that when they first acquired the chapel, there had been a desk upstairs. It had since been moved downstairs. Now this woman was very small, and Eric added that the desk had potentially been altered to suit a smaller person. It matched. Laura seemed genuinely excited, not because of drama, but because a sense had connected with something tangible. Later, Laura shared something that made this moment even more meaningful. She told me that the artifacts in that cabinet were not in there when I first visited in April. In fact, they weren't on display at all. At that time, they were still hidden beneath the floorboards of the old schoolroom. It wasn't until the summer when Laura, Eric, and a couple of close friends of the museum were carefully exploring the building that they discovered them. Decades ago, those items must have fallen down the back of a cupboard without a proper floor, and one that opened up into the cavity beneath the room. And there they had remained waiting. So when that corner of the séance parlour pulled at me, and when I saw her, when I described a woman with a clipboard checking and rechecking, I don't think I was responding to something I could have remembered. I simply couldn't have. And that knowledge stayed with me. Because sometimes validation doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly. In context and in understanding. The séance continued, and again that corner drew me in. Laura brought out a clipboard and a pen, and she invited the spirit to come and sit with us. And at one point the rope light seemed to respond. At one point it appeared as though something travelled along it all the way to the table. So we introduced an automatic writing planchette, and at first the marks were faint. So we decided to switch to a thicker charcoal pen, and it began to move. There wasn't much at first, but what appeared looked like a signature, a name, and later that would begin to make sense. The séance came to an end, and it was an experience I will never forget. Soft, gentle, but deeply striking. A quiet form of communication with whatever resides there. We moved over to the cabinet. Inside was a school register. We brought the automatic writing over to it to see if anything matched. It's hard to say there was a definitive yes, but there were marks that resembled the writing, which was enough to make us pause, and enough to make us reflect. We agreed it wasn't conclusive, but it was something. And in the paranormal field, sometimes something is enough to think about. We took another break, coffee and conversation. We spoke about personal experiences, about the paranormal, and about things we don't often say out loud. And I asked Laura something that had been weighing on me. And there's a feeling that I'd been carrying, that maybe someone had been intentionally sending negative universal energy my way. We'd had a recent run of severe bad luck, and I couldn't shake the sense that it wasn't random. The thing with Laura and Eric is that you can speak openly, and frankly without any fear or judgment. And I felt able to talk about that feeling, and Laura listened. She explained what I might be experiencing, and she gave me advice to take away. Eric nodded along, grounded, reassuring, and offering quiet balance. It was a wholesome moment that I never expected. A human moment where I felt heard, where the paranormal wasn't dismissed, and it is something that will stay with me. After that we moved into the chapel, and Chris took over. He introduced some new cards known as an infinity deck. Now they carry answers of yes, no, maybe. You call out, you focus, and you allow intuition or something else to guide which card you turn. And they seemed to work surprisingly well. And they gave clear responses, insightful ones. After this, Chris had decided he wanted to try the Estes method up in the gallery. He would sit above us, alone and wearing headphones, and we would remain below. The chapel was dark now. The lights dimmed, and the space felt different. Above us, the gallery rose out of the shadows. That long wooden balcony running the length of the room, and the organ towering at the far end. Rows of empty pews stretching toward the altar. Chris was up there and cut off from us, and below it was just me, Laura and Eric, sitting together in the stillness looking up. The Estes method began, and Chris started to speak. Words and phrases coming through him, disconnected and unfiltered. We asked questions from below, simple ones and gentle ones, and then something shifted. We were experiencing the chapel responding, not with bangs, not with fear, but with something quieter. Chris kept saying he could feel someone moving around him, and that there was a presence shifting in the space, circling and passing close. And as he said it, we could hear faint noises above us, and soft movement, a subtle creak in the gallery. The kind of sound that isn't dramatic but unmistakably there. And Chris's voice began to change. The tone shifted, the rhythm altered. He didn't say he was afraid, but we could hear it in him, in the way his words slowed, and in the way his breathing changed. From below, we spoke gently. We asked whatever was there not to frighten him. And what struck me most was this. The presence never felt negative. It didn't feel angry. It didn't feel dark. And it didn't feel hostile. It felt curious. And then Laura asked a question, and she said something along the lines of, "We have heard this chapel has a history of angels and miracles. Can you tell us something about that?" And through Chris's voice came the words, "Heaven is here." A direct response. A direct echo of the spiritual manifestations this place is known for. And fragmented names followed. William, Samuel, and something like Johns or Jones. And taken together, they could point toward Reverend W.S. Jones, the healer. It felt fragile but fitting, and we were stunned, not afraid. We were in awe. Because it felt as though something of the chapel's past, its purpose, and its meaning, had briefly surfaced again. Not as a spectacle, not as performance, but as presence. We decided it was time to bring Chris back down, and Laura was visibly excited. She was already talking to him about what had been happening below. Me and Eric drifted into a different conversation, talking tech. He was interested in the phone I was using to take photos, and I loved that contrast. One moment you're standing in a chapel listening to a voice say heaven is here, and the next you're comparing cameras, and that balance matters because it keeps you human. And then, like every investigation eventually does, we headed back for a ghost hunting staple. Coffee. After this, we moved back into the old schoolroom, and honestly, from this point on, my memory thins. There were subtle hints of activity, small moments and gentle sensations, but it felt as though the night had begun to quieten. Like whatever had stepped forward earlier had now retreated. the echoes fading, and the space settling back into itself. And the cold began to creep in, through hands, through feet, and through bone. And time moved without us noticing, and before we realised it, it was 1:30 in the morning. Our equipment was packed away, and the lights came back on. The chapel returned to stillness, and we left not with fear, not with answers, but with something far more personal. A moment that will stay with me, not because it proved anything, but because it reminded me why we come to places like this. To listen, to feel, to stand in spaces where belief once lived, and ask quietly, what remains? Before I close, I want to thank Laura and Eric for their warmth, for their openness, and for creating a space that feels safe, respectful, and genuinely human. What we experienced at Rowtons was unforgettable, not because it was dramatic, but because it was wholesome. After we left, I found myself creating AI images, trying to give form to the spirits I saw in my mind's eye. And this was to capture their essence in a way that felt human. You can see these images on our YouTube thumbnail. And with Laura's blessing, those images will be shared with the Rowtons audience, as a gentle, intentional use of technology to explore what was felt, rather than prove what was seen. This investigation taught me something important. To listen, and to be silent, and to understand that not every moment needs to be filmed. That sometimes the most meaningful experiences are the ones you simply allow to happen. And when you're surrounded by the right people, people who hold space, who respect the unknown, and who let you be exactly who you are, anything becomes possible. And even believing what you're sensing is always a good place to start. Before you go, don't forget to follow Beyond Haunted UK on Spotify and across social media. Every follow, every share, and every message helps this community grow and keeps these stories alive. You'll find us wherever the strange and the spiritual meet. And as a final favour, please follow Rowtons Museum of the Paranormal and Spirituality across social media, and visit if you can. Venues like this often need the most help and support. Thank you for listening.